Story 1. The Whispering Shadows. Lily had always been a skeptic. Ghosts, hauntings, and all things supernatural seemed like fantasies for the easily fooled. But her view changed the night she moved into the old house on Elm Street, a place so shrouded in legends that the locals avoided it like the plague. The house was dark and dreary, with walls lined with faded wallpaper and floors that creaked under the lightest step. Despite the warnings, Lily was thrilled by its low price and historic charm. She just unpacked her boxes and settled in when she began to notice unusual things. At first, it was small sounds, whispers, almost like the breeze, yet coming from inside the house. She dismissed them, chalking it up to an old home settling. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, taking on the tone of actual voices that seemed to come from the corners of her room. They would start around midnight, soft and persistent, like someone trying to tell her a secret. One night, Lily decided to confront whatever was causing the noises. She sat up in bed, staring into the dark. "Who are you?" she called, her voice steady, but her heart racing. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a cold breeze swept through the room, and the whispers began to coalesce, forming words she could finally understand. "Leave, while you can." She felt a chill down her spine, yet she was too stubborn to leave her new home. As the nights passed, the warnings became threats, each one clearer and more menacing. One voice in particular was louder than the rest, a deep, growling tone that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. "You don't belong here," it said, almost lovingly. Despite her bravery, fear finally crept in. Lily decided it was time to leave. But on the night before her departure, the voices grew desperate, almost pleading. She barely slept, too terrified to close her eyes. As dawn approached, she began to pack her bags, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. But when she tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. She tried the windows. They were all sealed tight, trapping her inside. That's when she felt it, the icy hand on her shoulder, pulling her back into the darkness. The whispers surrounded her, louder and louder, until they weren't whispers at all, but screams of anger and agony. Lily never made it out of the house on Elm Street. A few months later, a new "for sale" sign appeared outside. The whispers waited eagerly inside, ready for the next visitor who dared to call them nothing but fantasies. Story 2. The Night Shift. Mark had just started a new job as a night security guard at an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The building was old, its once white walls now faded and chipped, with long, dark hallways that seemed to stretch endlessly. The place had a history, but he didn't care to ask about it. All he knew was that it paid well and offered solitude, two things he valued. On his first night, Mark's shift began as expected. He walked the halls, his footsteps echoing as he made his rounds. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional drip of a leaky faucet or the hum of the flickering lights. But halfway through his shift, he noticed something odd. In one of the rooms, he found a chair that wasn't there before, placed right in the middle of the floor, facing the door. He was sure he'd walked by that room earlier, and it had been empty. Shrugging it off, he moved the chair back to the corner and continued his rounds. An hour later, he passed by the same room. The chair had moved again, now facing the window. Mark's stomach tightened, but he tried to laugh it off. Probably just nerves, he told himself. But as the night wore on, more strange things happened. He'd hear faint whispers, see shadows moving in his peripheral vision, and once he even thought he saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. But when he shined his flashlight in that direction, nothing was there. Around 3 a.m., he started to feel uneasy, like he was being watched. As he walked down another hallway, he noticed something chilling, a set of fresh footprints leading from the entrance toward the room with the moving chair. The prints were wet, leaving a trail that glistened under his flashlight. He decided to follow them, his heart racing. They led him right back to the room with the chair. Only this time, there was someone sitting in it. The figure was hunched over, a man with his back to Mark, dressed in what looked like an old hospital gown. Mark took a step back, unsure if this was a real person or a trick of his tired mind. "Sir, you're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice shaky. But the figure didn't respond. Instead, it began to rock back and forth, slowly, its shoulders moving rhythmically. Mark took another step, his hand reaching for his radio, when the figure stopped rocking and turned to face him. It was pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through him, and its mouth opened into a chilling, empty smile. "It's my shift now," it whispered. Mark turned and ran, the sound of footsteps following close behind him as he fled down the halls. When he finally made it outside, he didn't look back. He quit that same night, never returning to the abandoned hospital. But sometimes, in the quiet of his apartment, he could still hear the faint echo of footsteps, slowly following him through the halls of his mind. Story 3. The Midnight Passenger. Jake was a taxi driver, used to late nights and the strange people who often climbed into his car during the darkest hours. It was an ordinary Friday night when he got the call, a pickup request on the edge of town near the old highway. He sighed, knowing it would be a long drive, but money was money. When he pulled up to the spot, he saw her, a young woman standing by the road, her pale skin illuminated in the car's headlights. She was dressed in an old-fashioned white dress that looked strangely out of place. As she stepped into the back seat, Jake felt a chill run down his spine. She was silent, her gaze fixed straight ahead. "Where to?" he asked, trying to keep things professional. The woman's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Just drive. I'll tell you where to go." Jake shrugged, pulling away from the curb and heading down the dark, empty road. As he drove, he kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She looked distant, her eyes fixed somewhere far away, her expression blank. The car was filled with an uneasy silence, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. After a while, she spoke. "Do you believe in ghosts?" The question caught Jake off guard. He chuckled nervously. "I've heard stories, but I'm not really one for ghost tales." She smiled faintly, her gaze still distant. "They say ghosts are just souls with unfinished business." He nodded, not sure what to say, and kept driving. After a few miles, she told him to turn left onto an old, narrow road he'd never seen before. The trees on either side cast eerie shadows, making it feel like they were driving into darkness itself. The woman spoke again. "I lost something here, a long time ago." He didn't know how to respond, so he just kept driving. The road seemed endless, with no signs, no other cars, just an unbroken stretch of darkness. Finally, they reached a dead end, surrounded by tall, twisted trees. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake stopped the car, turning to face her, but the back seat was empty. His heart raced as he stared at the seat, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt her leave. She was just gone. As he sat there, trying to make sense of it, he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. She was there, behind him, her face inches from his, her eyes filled with a sorrow he couldn't fathom. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty car. Jake blinked, and in that instant, she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of wildflowers behind. Shaken, he drove back to town, vowing to never speak of the midnight passenger again. But every now and then, when he drives down that old highway, he feels her presence, lingering in the silence, as if waiting for him to help her find her way home.